Hello to you, beautiful people of Africa and the world at large. Welcome to today's edition of the program Global Insight on For You Media Africa. Today we are going to focus on the crisis in Ukraine, looking at the realities of the war in the Donbass, and also analyzing deeply the global ramifications or implications of the ongoing crisis. It should be noted that on July 1st, 2024, the Russian Federation assumed the presidency of the United Nations Security Council. Since then, it has been organizing press conferences on key and topical issues of global concern. To be particular, on the 3rd of July 2024, some experts from the United States of America, including a lawyer and journalist, visited delivered a press conference in New York pertaining their recent visit to the Donbass, including Donetsk, Kherson, Luhansk, and Zaporizhzhia briefly. And this press briefing was sponsored by the permanent mission of the Russian Federation with a group of legal and political experts. This, of course, followed their recent visit to Donbass. And the mission was aimed at gathering untold stories and ascertaining the realities, and also to where the present stakes in the Donbass. So together with a panel of experts on this edition of Global Insight, we are going to go deeper into analyzing the geopolitical implications and even, economic and social ramification of the crisis ongoing in the Donbass, and also to relate this with what is happening elsewhere in the Middle East, the African continent, and the world at large. You are most welcome, and this is Global Insight. Thank you so much. Of course, let's go straight away to uncover the panel, and taking you now to Russia. We've been joined by YULIA BERG, a political scientist and also founder of GLOBUS Expert Club. Hello to you, YULIA, and welcome to today's edition of the program.
Hello, good afternoon. Happy to join today's discussion.
It is very imperative that we look at the ongoing crisis and also gather some, understanding as to how this crisis, which have been ongoing since 2014, actually affecting the global arena. And to the United States of America, let's welcome Dana KOVALIK, a lawyer and human rights scholar, also a peace advocate. Hello to you, Dan. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Just to note that in the course of the program, we're going to have key interventions from Jackson HINKLE, who is an American political commentator and a journalist. Of course, he was part of the mission to the Donbass to ascertain the present state of affairs. So we also will have the viewpoint of Christopher Helali, a member of the Administrative Committee, United National Anti-War Coalition, International Secretary of the Communist Party, and of course let's dive straight away to having the introductory statement pertaining our topic for discussion. Does the realities of the war in the Donbass, and looking at the global ramifications. Let's kick off with you, Dan. You were part of the mission that recently visited the Donbass, and of course, can you holistically explain to us the state of affairs in this restive region, or the region at war at this moment?
Yes, this was my third trip to the Donbass in the last year and a half, and I should
please,
mention that
can you unmute your mic, please? We can hear you then.
Oh, working. Can you hear me now?
Okay, I can hear you.
Yes, so this is my third trip to the Donbass in about a year and a half, and YULIA helped me get to Donetsk twice before this, so I think I have a good handle on what's happening there. This last trip was to Lugansk. That was my first trip to Lugansk, which is a little, it is certainly in the crosshairs of the war, but not as much as Donetsk is. one thing I was struck by is frankly how good the city looked for the most part. We did see, of course, buildings that had been shelled by Ukraine, some very recently. But as soon as those buildings are shelled, and by the way, they're invariably shelled with U.S. munitions, as soon as they are shelled, the folks of Lugansk and the Russians move in quickly to start rebuilding. So the city looked quite good. The main road into town is a new road that Russia had built since the special military operations began in 2022. And there are a lot of signs of both reconstruction and new construction that the Russians have been doing. Yeah, you can see here the back of Vladimir Lenin. You just saw that. That's part of the Parliament building, which is under major refurbishment by Russia. So that's what I was struck by that, certainly, that Lugansk is in the process of building and rebuilding. And the people there seemed good. They seemed like things were going well for them for the first time in quite a while.
Coming to you, Yulia, let's look at the development patterning of the crisis in the Donbass and relate it with the recent mission that the export conducted to the Donbass. So, what do you think is the state of affairs, given the involvement, of course, of the collective West, as you call it, in one of our discussions pertaining the crisis in the Donbass, pertaining what Daniel just underlined. In your own perspective, what do you think are those complexities that we see today trying to hinder the smooth resolve of the crisis?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that the journalists, the experts, lawyers, human rights activists, and all of those people, especially the ones coming from the West, that do go to Donbass to be able to see with their own eyes what's happening there and talk to people and understand the situation better, they have a great courage, especially given the fact that the media, the mainstream media, in 90% or 95% of cases takes a completely different angle on the happenings there, underlining the fact that escalation started in 2022, even though the actual conflict, the military conflict, began in 2014. So first of all, it's very important that people have the interest and people have the courage to go there to the war zone and to be able to estimate the situation themselves. And the recent 2 trips that Daniel KOVALIK was on and Jackson HINKLE, those also required a lot of, let's say, willpower and strength. And Jackson was the one to visit the Zaporozhye nuclear plant, which is so much discussed in the media as the constant shelling that it undergoes. It is posing tremendous threats to the entire region, as we all understand it's a nuclear plant, but being able to see what's actually happening there and being able to see the actual munition or what remains from that munition after the shelling, to realize where it actually comes from. And some of it is US made. I think this point will be disclosed a bit later, deeper into the program. But, having organized some of those trips and being the founder of the GLOBUS Expert Club, I should highlight the fact that a lot of the experts that are active participants of our events and programs and projects, they have already been to Donbass, and they have been analyzing the material. And I think it's essential to be able to provide not an alternative point of view, but a point of view that is based on the-ground experience. So that's key for the understanding of the roots and possible solutions of the current conflict.
Solutions we're going to check in the days or the months ahead if this mission, the feedback from the expert will actually bring any change in the way, especially the multilateral institutions are handling the crisis in the Donbass. Before actually entering into that, let's also get the viewpoint of Christopher Helali, who was a part of this mission. And he in this first intervention, we're going to listen to him, where he actually underlined that the crisis in the Donbass did not start with the Russia's special military operation. Let's listen to him, and I'll be right back.
Thank you very much, everyone, for this opportunity to speak to you all today. My colleague here, Dan KOVALIK, and I recently returned from a fact-finding mission to the Lugansk People's Republic, hosted, as Dan rightfully pointed out, by the Union of Political Emigrants and Political Prisoners of Ukraine. After months of arduous planning and organizing, we felt this delegation was essential for us to see the situation on the ground for ourselves, including interviewing locals and officials who have been party to this conflict since it started in 2014. That is a critical point. This war did not begin in 2022 with Russia's special military operation. Rather, it began in 2014, and I want to emphasize this point. The people of the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics in the Donbass have endured a decade of bombardment, terrorism, and brutality, all of which have been severely underreported or even misreported in the West. We visited mass graves containing hundreds of dead civilians, some of whom remain unidentified to this day. There are a small fraction of the tens of thousands of civilians killed or injured during this siege on the Donbass. We saw shelled civilian infrastructure and other physical instances of war crimes committed by the Ukrainian military. What we discovered provided a completely different understanding that went beyond the myopic narratives proffered by the mainstream media here in the United States and in the West. On our delegation, we were joined by two Georgians, a journalist and an activist. The similarity between Georgia and Ukraine vis-a-vis Western involvement in NATO expansion is striking. Georgians fear that the next front for the United States and NATO will be in the Caucasus, as it was in 2007-2008. First and foremost, the narrative that Russia quote-unquote invaded the Donbass in 2014 is completely false, and we saw that on the ground. It not only strips the local population of their agency, but it further promotes an understanding of a population which is occupied against their will. The reality is that the people of the Donbass were citizens of Ukraine in 2014. Many still are. Some served in the Ukrainian government, in its military, and its police forces. However, the Maidan uprising in 2014 and the removal of President Viktor Yanukovych sent shockwaves throughout the country. The rise of extremist groups, including prominent neo-Nazi militias and forces, as well as the rampant historical revisionism and denial of the Russian language and identity, were critical components of the eventual internal civil strife that quickly morphed into what can aptly be described as a civil war. As Human Rights Ombudsman and former Deputy Foreign Minister of the Lugansk People's Republic, Anna Soroka, put it to me, I was a Ukrainian officer. We were told to love our motherland and to be patriotic. I feel personally betrayed. It was Ukrainian police that provided security in the regions that voted in the referendums for independence. It was Ukrainian police and military personnel who felt that the new government in Kiev was not in the best interests of their people and decided to provide protection and support to their people in the Donbass. They simply changed their uniforms, but they remained Ukrainian. Thus, it was Ukrainians who were struggling with one another over their past, their present, and their future. We witnessed firsthand the crumbling infrastructure, closed factories, unpaved roads, and dilapidated tenements. Here it is critical to note that we heard from people throughout the Lugansk region that from 1991 to 2014, there was very little investment in eastern Ukraine. Eastern Ukraine was left destitute with no program of reconstruction, rehabilitation, investment, and development. On the contrary, the bulk of the money was concentrated in Kiev and western Ukraine. This led to eastern Ukraine being considered by many as a backwards, uneducated, and primitive territory, with homeless, drunk, dirty, and antisocial people, as it was put to me by locals. This division between western and eastern Ukraine has historical legacies that are important to analyze and to understand. The demographic crisis in post-Soviet Ukraine reveals a deeper terminal crisis, as millions left in search of better lives. However, since 2022 and the region's incorporation into the Russian Federation, there has been a tremendous amount of investment and improvements in infrastructure in the Donbass. We witnessed the paving of new roads throughout the region, as well as the construction of new apartment buildings, university housing, playgrounds, schools, as well as the rehabilitation of older facilities and factories. As one local resident put it, when Russia intervenes, it leaves roads, libraries, and schools. When NATO invades a country, all it leaves is rubble.
Of course, thank you for that, Christopher. And we continue with you, the analysis, listening to the genesis of the crisis coming from the U.S. export that recently visited the Donbass, Daniel KOVALIK. Do you think this will change the narratives or maybe the ways of the global leaders in solving the crisis between the Russian Federation and Ukraine, pertaining the realities on the ground? Hello, Daniel. Please, can you unmute your mic?
The only way to resolve this conflict and to find peace is to begin with an understanding of how it began. And as has been said, it did not begin in 2022. It began in 2014 with a right-wing coup against a legitimate elected president. This coup was supported and orchestrated by the United States. How do we know that? Because Victoria Nuland, who's in the State Department at the time, admitted that she helped orchestrate the coup. And the government that came to power is hostile towards its own Russian-speaking population, which, by the way, nearly all Ukrainians speak Russian on a daily basis. But they were hostile also to their ethnic Russians, particularly in the eastern part of Ukraine, particularly in the Donbass. The Russian language was, which had been part of the official language of Ukraine, was banned in the public realm, and acts of violence began against the Russian ethnic population. One of the big events which we discussed at the UN press conference was, of course, the Odessa massacre on May 2nd, 2014, in which 48 people were killed, most burned alive in the trade union building in Odessa by nationalist forces loyal to Kiev. And this led to Donetsk and Lugansk seeking independence, and they sought independence through popular referenda in which the people, the majority of the people, voted to become independent, sovereign states. And it was to defend these states that led Russia to intervene in 2022, because these two states were about to be invaded by Ukraine in a major way, which we also discussed at the UN. So in order to find a resolution to this, the brokers of any deal have to understand that the people of the Donbass will never want to go back to Ukraine, that they want to be part of Russia, as they voted to do in September 2022. And their sovereign desires, their self-determination needs to be respected. But again, none of that's going to happen unless those involved in discussions are honest about that history.
Absolutely. Indeed, it's about the major stakeholders considering the will of the people, and in the same perspective with you, dear Yulia, with the information that is coming from the ground, you notice that because it has been, declared by the United Nations General Assembly and other countries actually seeing the Donbass and even the Crimea as, Ukraine state that the Russian Federation is temporarily occupying. And with the first-hand information that is coming from this group of experts that recently visited the Donbass and communicated directly with the population that made, of course, their opinions and their needs public to them. Can this change, I still come back to the very pivotal question, because the Russia-Ukraine crisis has been lingering on every international gathering. We saw the supposed peace conference that held in Switzerland in June, and also NATO will be meeting in Washington, should be this month, and they will particularly talk again about the Ukraine crisis. With all of these facts which are coming from experts, especially of American descent, will this change the way these multilateral organizations view the crisis? And can we already talk of a possible return to peace?
Well, the ongoing conflict in Eastern Europe at the territory that used to be Ukraine, and now some of it is part of Russian Federation, it has actually divided the world into two groups. And it's hard to find countries that would not somehow stick to one of those two groups in one way or another. So group number one is what we here call the collective West, even though it includes countries like Japan, Australia. The governments of those countries also support that coalition, let's say. And many other countries that we here call the world majority, because in terms of that, we're talking about the absolute majority of the population of the world. So those countries that, of course, in most cases, they're not actively advocating for the transformation at the global arena, yet at the same time, they do indicate it, and in some cases, they indicate it in quite a visible way, that they're also tired of the existing system that is based on the West's hegemony and control over their resources, their political systems, their financial models, and they're unhappy with the fact that the West, for some reason, has the right that it has given itself to use military force wherever they wish to, especially in the regions that are rich in oil, gas, and other resources. And so we see that there have been problems that were piling up, and there have been issues that countries or regions were facing with various kinds of interventions. We can recall Yugoslavia that that had to be divided into several different countries. We could say similar things about Libya, where the intervention was provoked by Muammar Gaddafi's desire to build a strong Pan-African community on the continent and to get more sovereignty, real sovereignty, not just the formal independence. We could see this kind of interventions in Iraq, Afghanistan, pretty much all over South America, which Dan KOVALIK could definitely talk a lot more about. So we could see that when those conflicts were local or regional, of course, they were affecting the happenings at the international arena as well. Yet the conflict in Ukraine has become this last drop, the tipping point for the launch of the global transformation. And Before that, we could see that some of the new alliances or institutions or ways of doing things, let's say, were already emerging. BRICS probably being the most promising of those. And now that the conflict in Ukraine revealed a lot of hypocrisy in the West, revealed a lot of their actual patterns and neo-colonial models that were implemented or attempted to be implemented. Of course, this just, let's say, contributed to catalyzing those processes that were already inevitable. As you know, international relations is also a system that has a certain evolution. And of course, nothing can stay the same way forever, especially if you have disbalances, and especially when you have changing circumstances and conditions that the system is not adapting to. So you have strong China, you have strong India, you have a much stronger Pan-African movement and movement for actual sovereignty in Africa when the people, the governments realize that they already have the resources and it's not them that need the West, but the West that needs Africa. So a lot of those things led to the processes that were, let's say, fast-forwarded, and we're going through this transformation that would result into a change of the international relations system, probably major changes in the economic system, and definitely big changes will occur in the area of security.
Indeed, talking about the global transformation and how it is, changing narratives across the global world. Briefly, with you, Daniel, can't we say that the world is moving towards a multipolarity, and we see that the world is more divided? Is there some sort of contradiction between this new world order that is coming to play, and then the fact that the world seems to be highly divided? Let's look critically between what is happening in Europe, Eastern and Western Europe.
Well, the new world that is being born, as you say, is this multipolar world. And yes, I suppose that within the two poles represented by the BRICS, and then the other pole represented, I suppose, by the NATO and NATO-aligned countries, yes, there's strong, well, there's unity within the BRICS, there's some unity within the NATO aligned countries, though that seems to be breaking apart a bit. But of course, there's tensions between the two poles, which is quite natural. But I think that the burgeoning multipolar world, the rise of the BRICS countries, the BRICS plus now, is a good thing. It had to happen. And it was very interesting that it really was that while BRICS has been in existence for a while, it really wasn't until the special military operations began in February of 2022 that you saw the rest of the world, as Yulia pointed out, the world majority, come together and reject the West in a very big way. I think that the world majority, which is represented by the global South mostly, and by Russia, China, Iran, they were waiting for someone to finally fight back, right? Because since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the U.S. and the West have been able to attack countries at will, and have done it. They used their power to do that. And when Russia finally said, that's enough, we're not going to take it anymore, we're not going to allow Ukraine to be used as a petri dish for the CIA, for biological weapons, for fascism, and they fought back, the rest of the world responded and said, you know what, we're with you. We think that's good. Absolutely. We're tired of getting invaded. We're tired of getting our governments overthrown by the CIA. And now I think with Gaza, what's happening there, you have even the multipolar world, blossoming even further because the world is uniting around Gaza, or at least, again, the world majority. So, look, it's a scary time to live in many ways because we are facing a lot of conflicts globally, but it's an exciting and hopeful time to live. The quote from Antonio Gramsci, the great Italian communist, comes to mind. He said, "The old world has yet to die. The new world has yet to be born. This is the time of monsters." And that is true. It's the time of monsters. But the new world is being born. It will be born.
Indeed, it will be born, and it is already born. Now, we quite mentioned in the preamble that Jackson HINKLE, an American political commentator who is also a journalist, was part of this mission of experts to the Donbass. So I'll be inviting us to listen to him. It should be noted that during his briefing at the United Nations, he quite underlined that this first-hand information from the field will actually change the perception of Americans have pertaining the role of Russia in the crisis in the Donbass, and of course bringing some peculiarities of the crisis. Let's listen to Jackson HINKLE.
Greetings, everybody. This is Jackson HINKLE reporting from New York City. I'm outside the United Nations headquarters. Today, I want to share my experiences from my recent trip to the newly liberated regions of Russia in the Donbass. My journey took me to the regions of Mariupol, Tokmak, Berdyansk, Melitopol, and the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, providing me with firsthand insight that starkly contradicts the narratives that the Western mainstream media and Western political elite have put forward over the past 2.5 years. The following 3 points are the basis of my observations, and they reveal a different reality than we've heard from the mainstream. 1, Ukraine is not seeking to end this conflict, but is instead trying to escalate it in an unthinkably dangerous manner. Number 2, the Donbass and the people that reside there do not want to remain under Ukrainian control, but instead hold great admiration for President Putin and the Russian Federation's efforts to protect and rebuild the Donbass. Number 3, Ukraine is not defeating Russia, no matter what CNN has to say, but is instead using its Western support to carry out horrifying acts of terrorism against the people of the Donbass. First, let's talk about my visit to Mariupol. During the hour-long drive from the Donbass border into the city of Mariupol, I witnessed well over 1,000 construction vehicles working tirelessly into the night. It might sound hyperbolic, but I guarantee you it is not. I've never seen anything like it in my life before. Russia is diligently rebuilding the highways and roads abandoned by previous Ukrainian governments. In Mariupol itself, the results are you see them with your own eyes. The work of these construction teams is completely evident to anyone who sets foot in the city. New schools, beautiful parks, gyms, theaters, stores, hotels, and hundreds, actually thousands of new apartment buildings have been rebuilt and provided to victims of the conflict for free. Residents expressed their gratitude for a government that is proactive and committed to responding to their needs when I visited. Mariupol residents also proudly shared with me the remarkable efficiency of the construction crews, who can rebuild 2 blocks of infrastructure within 1 to 2 weeks, which shocked me given that it takes years to even get a permit to build a single road in the United States of America. This massive reconstruction effort shows a nation committed to rebuilding and supporting its people. Next, my visit to Tokmak, located about 15 kilometers from the front line. This was a very stark revelation for me. Contrary to the claims that Ukraine seeks to save the people of the Donbass from Russia, to go in and liberate them from Russian invaders, what I witnessed was a horrifying campaign of U.S.-backed terrorism against innocent civilians. The first site we encountered in Tokmak was a massive crater from a missile that had exploded just a few feet from a kindergarten playground where children once went to school, just 2 months before I arrived. The windows of the kindergarten were completely shattered, with glass scattered across the schoolyard. A week later, a U.S.-supplied ATACMS missile targeted a civilian home directly across the street. And 2 weeks after that, another civilian home on the opposite side of the street was struck, resulting in the deaths of 2 civilians and injuries of several others. I had the opportunity to visit the top of this building, which was destroyed by one of these missiles launched from Ukraine. In the rubble, I found children's school books, children's toys, and household items. The roof of the apartment had been completely destroyed. When I descended, I met the wife of one of the victims, who recounted the harrowing experience of losing her husband in the attack. She explained that Ukraine was routinely targeting their neighborhood with missile strikes, fully aware that they were bombing civilians rather than military targets. We then crossed the street to visit a third and final building that had been bombed by a U.S.-supplied missile 2 weeks before we arrived. In a garden in front of the building, several elderly residents shared their experiences with us. Some of these residents had actually voted for Zelensky in 2019, but now expressed their profound disgust in his actions and U.S.-backed Ukrainian terrorism that was affecting their homes. They now voiced their total admiration for President Putin and the armed forces of the Russian Federation for their efforts in protecting and rebuilding their community. Lastly, my visit to the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant highlighted the grave risks posed by Ukraine's military actions. Despite the plant being just a few kilometers away from the front line, we are very close to it. Thousands of heroic workers continue their duties daily. However, several points of critical infrastructure have been compromised by Ukrainian drone attacks and shelling. I saw this with my own eyes. One particularly alarming site was a U.S. missile lodged in the ground just 100 feet away from where the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant stores their nuclear waste. This reckless attack could have led to a catastrophic nuclear disaster, endangering millions of lives. Such actions are far from the moral code of conduct that a military should uphold. In conclusion, my observations from the Donbass reveal a reality that is starkly different from the narratives presented by Western mainstream media and politicians. The truth I've witnessed shows that Ukraine is not on the path to victory, but rather escalating a conflict that threatens to draw the world into a larger war. The horrifying acts of terrorism carried out against civilians in Tokmak and the reckless jeopardization of nuclear safety at the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant illustrate a deliberate strategy of violence and escalation rather than a genuine pursuit of peace. The people of Donbass who have endured immense suffering are now experiencing a measure of hope and rebuilding under Russian efforts, a hope that stands in stark contrast to the false portrayals of Russian aggression and Ukrainian victimhood. We must heed the words, now more than ever before, of the now free Julian Assange, who once said, "If wars can be started by lies, peace can be started by truth." It is imperative that we confront these falsehoods and work towards de-escalating this conflict. We must advocate for an end to Western arms supplies that fuel terrorism and risk catastrophic consequences. Most importantly, we must commit ourselves to reporting the truth, shining a light on the innocent civilians caught in the crossfire, and seeking a path to genuine peace. Only through truth and transparency can we hope to resolve this conflict and prevent the devastating possibility of global catastrophe.
Can be started by Trotter. Let's now analyze this critically with you, Yulia. You know, according to some pundit, with what is happening, like Jackson underlined, it should be noted also that for you, Media Africa was able to make way to the Donbass to ascertain the realities and communicate with the population directly. And I think that through field work, you can ascertain the real state of affairs. Now, the question is to try to understand, the viewpoint of some pundits who see that in spite of the fact that the people of the Donbass have made it public and even legally and constitutionally through the referendum, and they are partaking in elections joining the Russian Federation, we still see that the war is still ongoing, and some pundits feel like the parties involved in the war are not concerned about the lives of the people in the Donbass, but rather wanting to reclaim the land. What explanation can we give to this statement, Yulia?
Well, what could be interesting to take a closer look at is a legal analysis of the situation in Ukraine and Donbass since 2014, because if we want to actually understand the situation, we need to go back to what was happening in 2014 when basically the legitimate president was betrayed by the protesting side that did not follow the agreement that they signed, and whatever was happening after was not really correlating with the constitution of the country. So what was called in Ukraine the anti-terroristic operation that was launched in 2014 and was actually targeting civilians that decided to stay strong, and many of them chose to take up guns and protect their land and their families and their right for choosing the religion, the country, or I mean the language, the culture, the religion that they practice, and that was happening after the events that Dan just mentioned, the people that were killed and burned alive at the trade union building in Odessa. So what's called the anti-terroristic operation that was happening for several years, and it was conducted not just by the official Ukrainian military forces, but also some quite radical military groups that were not even a part of the official military, and that were demonstrating atrocities and sophisticated ways of torture of civilians in those regions. There was a lot of intimidation, and there is still quite a lot of evidence that is present. Some of the experts and some of the journalists, when they traveled to Donbass, they got to talk to people that went through the basements, that went through torture, that were in captivity in those times, starting from 2014. So legal analysis of the situation and factual analysis of what was actually happening there from 2014 to 2022 would give a lot of interesting answers, but if we start the conversation about the legal issues, formalities, constitution, etc., we should also highlight the fact that after the failed negotiations of 2022, just around 3 months into the conflict, Zelensky has signed a decree that outlaws having negotiations with Russia. So at the moment, it's hard to understand how exactly the peace settlement should be taking place in legal terms. And there is another interesting fact that is important to know to understand the situation and the possible solutions for it. And that fact is that there was supposed to be a presidential election in May this year, as Zelensky's term was over, and it was not held. The election was canceled. Which also makes a lot of questions arise, because according to the constitution, in wartime in Ukraine, the parliament can have extended term, and the parliament has some exclusive rights in this kind of conditions, yet there is nothing about the presidential term being automatically extended in case of military activities or wartime. And as you rightfully mentioned, elections and referenda were organized in those regions when active military confrontation was ongoing. So we know it's realistic, and there are quite a lot of historical examples in other countries. And it looks like Zelensky just was really not sure that he would be re-elected. So at the moment, from the legal point of view, and Vladimir Putin was also talking about it quite a lot, from the legal point of view and also from the point of view of common sense, it looks like Zelensky is not the one who can be holding negotiations, as we do already understand after the Istanbul negotiation that did not end in peace settlement as it could have, due to the visit of Boris Johnson to Kiev, who probably explained why the conflict should continue to Zelensky. So we see that Ukraine is not a sovereign country, and it cannot survive at the moment without the foreign aid, and it doesn't have the sovereignty to make its own decisions. And moreover, if we take a closer look on what was happening, so aside for crazy deals that were arranged around the military equipment supply and weapon supply, and if we look at how much of it has flown into the illegal market, to the gray zone, and wherever you could think of. If we look at what was happening to the properties, the businesses, if we look at the comments that were released by some American politicians that are estimating the resources of Ukraine, basically saying that this is what they're fighting for, the natural resources, the agricultural resources that it has, and many others. So when you put all those pieces of the puzzle together, you understand that the situation is quite complicated, also because who do you talk to in this kind of a case in order to have the peace settlement? So who is Vladimir Putin supposed to have at the negotiation table in front of him? It's definitely not Zelensky, because he is not the decision maker. It's not even Joe Biden, because he doesn't seem to be capable of making this kind of decisions, and he seemed to be also directed probably by somebody else. So who is it? The BlackRock representatives as the key investors or the key potential beneficiaries of the conflict, or who is it? So it's a very good question, and even though recently Zelensky was making comments on this, saying that the negotiation or the peace deal could be structured just like the grain deal was, meaning that Ukraine would sign with some third party and the same third party would sign with Russia. But it's not exactly what you do when you want to have a peace treaty. And I think in terms of the legal issues, Mr. KOVALIK could give a more explicit and professional comment, but I'm just trying to pose some questions of critical importance here to make it clear that the fact that the legal rules, regulations, constitution, international law, pretty much everything was just simply ignored in that conflict. And I'm not talking about that period of time after the beginning of the special military operation, but I'm talking about whatever was happening starting from early 2014.
And that, of course, shows the complexities of things. To note that the crisis, of course, have brought international diplomatic relations to a point of uncertainty. And now we're going to ascertain the implications of the crisis on international diplomatic relations with you, Daniel KOVALIK. It should be noted that, of course, your visit to the Donbass this time around came, after the European Union and propounded its 14th sanctions against Russia, and this time around some other countries were touched, including Belarus. So let's look at how the crisis is affecting international diplomatic relations and alliances, especially with regards to the NATO-Russia relations, and how the overall balance of power will maybe reshape in the global world.
Yes, well, the diplomatic relations between the West and Moscow have never been worse. I mean, I think there's almost no diplomatic conversations happening, certainly between the U.S. and Russia. Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, has confirmed that there's no discussions happening, which has never really happened in the history of Russia-U.S. relations, even at the height of the Cold War. Let's remember, I mean, even during the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was probably the tensest moment during the Cold War, Khrushchev and Kennedy were talking to each other. They negotiated a solution to the Cuban Missile Crisis in 13 days through a give-and-take agreement. There was always a direct line between the White House and the Kremlin. That's all broken down, and not because of Russia. Russia has wanted to have discussions with the U.S. and the West about their legitimate security concerns, and the West has had no interest in talking to Russia or addressing those concerns. And that is leading us down a very dangerous path, of course, in which the possibility of a nuclear attack, either intentional or accidental, could easily happen. Recently Ukraine attacked Russian radar systems deep within Russian territory. I think the farthest attack was 11 kilometers within Russia. And the radar systems were not systems dedicated to or designed for detecting attacks by close countries like Ukraine, but they were designed to detect intercontinental ballistic missiles fired from the United States. So what is Russia to take from that? Is the U.S. preparing for a first strike against Russia? Well, even if the U.S. is not, the fact that Russia would at least be fearful of that means, and we know that this is happening, that Russia is on higher alert than it's ever been in terms of alert for a nuclear strike and the need for a counterstrike. And given that there's no talks between Russia and the United States, that means that, again, the danger of a nuclear war is greater than we've ever seen in human history. And that should be a concern to everyone in the world, because everyone in the world will be impacted by that. And that's why diplomacy is so important. When we were introduced at the press conference at the UN yesterday by a Russian diplomat, he said, "I'd like to refer to these three individuals, including myself, as citizen diplomats." And, that's exactly how I see myself and the colleagues who spoke yesterday. We're citizen diplomats. We're trying to do the diplomacy that needs to be done, that's not being done between the United States and Russia. We're trying in our own small way to prevent World War III. And we need more people to do that.
Indeed, while talking yesterday at the United Nations headquarters, Daniel, you said, and of course, categorical, that the world may be moving closer to the Third World War. The question is, how can we avert this?
Well, we can avert it by cooler heads prevailing, by diplomacy, by discussions, by negotiations. And again, I would urge, being an American, I focus a lot on what's happening within the United States. We need leaders who have diplomatic skills, that are trained in diplomatic skills. We used to have an incredible diplomatic corps in this country. Even during some of the darker days, you know, under Reagan, Bush, we had excellent diplomats. People who knew how to speak Russian, for example, who could quote Pushkin poetry. And I'm thinking of Jack Matlock, who was, I believe, one of Reagan's diplomats to the Soviet Union. We need those kind of people in power, people who want to talk to Russia, who want to make peace. And we don't have those people in power right now. That's just a fact. They're not there. They're not in the United States. They're not in Great Britain. They're not in Germany. And the people in those countries need to elect officials who want diplomacy, who want exchanges, who want peace. I'm certain Russia wants peace. You know, when I was at the UN yesterday, the second secretary of the mission, Russian mission to the United Nations, his name's Dmitry. He waited for me to talk to me. One of the first things he said is that they want peace. You don't even hear Western leaders talking about peace. It's a verboten word. The Russians do want peace, and we have to meet them at least halfway to forge that peace.
Okay, thank you for that. Just to remind our viewers that this is Global Insight on For You Media Africa, and today we're looking at the present realities in the Donbass, analyzing deeply the implications, especially at the international arena. How is the crisis in the Donbass, or the persistent crisis in the Donbass, affecting peace and security, global peace and security? How is it affecting international diplomatic relations? And of course, what is the way forward? Who are those to come to the table to bring peace and bring respite, particularly to the vulnerable populations still in the Donbass? Now it's time for us to analyze, you know, the similarities of the crisis in the Donbass and the Middle East, and look at some other African countries that are also, you know, facing similar situations. I think I'll go with you, Yulia. Let's look at, do you see any parallels between the situation in the Donbass and other conflict zones across the world, particularly the Middle East and some African countries?
Well, using that vocabulary, I think it would be correct to say that Ukraine is what Russia would have looked like if it was colonized. When I say colonized, I mean external governance, I mean political economic dependence, and I mean loss of sovereignty and own resources for external benefit. So what we see happening there, that started from you know, fueling internal conflicts, creating artificial conflicts, creating you know, cultural clashes, linguistic, religious, all kinds of clashes. I think it's quite typical for the patterns that have been used globally. Rewriting history, or let's say misinterpreting historical facts and all those things. Because, I mean, okay, could it be a constructive and healthy pattern to be taking down monuments to writers, to well, let's say governors, to the people that founded cities or built cities? Could it be a healthy scenario to be trying to disconnect people from their historical memory, their background, the historical memory of their family members, right? So it's quite a typical scenario when you know, this kind of a inferiority complex is also being created, and I think a lot of countries in the world and a lot of societies in the world have gone through that. If we look at India, if we look at Africa, if we look at South America, whatever is traditional in terms of culture, in terms of arts, in terms of belief systems. It was all labeled barbaric. It was all undeveloped, and even the term developing nations and developed nations show that there is supposed to be just one path that is correct for everyone. So it does not consider various kinds of input data, you know, I don't know, from climate, from cultural traditions to anything you might possibly mention. So this approach itself that implies having countries on the planet that are developed and underdeveloped and whatever, it already creates certain kind of a inferiority complex, because if we actually look at how civilizations and societies were developing, there was a point in time when Arabic countries or civilizations were really good in terms of science and in terms of, you know, culture. They were having beautiful artwork and already using forks and knives, and at the same time the European countries were in their dark days and times, being what they would have called quite barbaric, right? So I don't know, if we look at the fundamental science or a lot of various kinds of inventions and discoveries, we owe a lot to it, to China, to India. Once again, mathematics, also called algebra, comes from Arabic countries, and then the European scientists just simply translated the work of Arabic scientists in order to, you know, build up that area of knowledge. So, I mean, it's a very, I think, complex problem that we're looking at, and there are really a lot of similarities. And we also see the media machine, the Hollywood, and, you know, the cultural expansion, all playing the same role of humiliating nations, communities, societies, and even entire civilizations, trying to prove them that there is only one path that is correct, and it's their path, right? So, I mean, this discourse could go for hours and hours, providing various kinds of examples, but we see that the methods are very much similar all over the world, and we see that what is now called the world majority has suffered quite a lot from the fact that they do not even control their own economic system, they do not even control their own political decisions, and you know, that let's say that corrupt model has really been infiltrated and has really rooted itself very deep in many people's consciousness. I mean, not to go into numerous examples, that's a very similar pattern. And now that the information is much more accessible, now that people have internet access, now that people can communicate between each other in an easier way, social networks that are available to a lot of people also make a huge difference, because they stimulate critical thinking in many cases and provide alternative points of view. So all of this, and I assume that also the hypocrisy around the pandemic, I think all this contributed to awakening of a different level of consciousness among the majority of the people. So if you look at what regular people, not political experts, scientists, or civil activists discuss, you will see that many of them are noticing that they're being tricked. And when you look at simple facts, which are quite obvious at the African continent as well, you can make your own conclusions, right? So Africa being a continent with a young population, Africa being a continent full of everything that could be possibly needed for anything you could possibly imagine. And here, of course, I mean rare earth materials that are needed for electronics and sophisticated devices and whatsoever else. I mean, the continent has it all. And does it really have to be in a situation in which it cannot even own and govern its own richness, not necessarily as many people see right now.
And that is where the bone of contention lies. Since you mentioned particularly Africa, Yulia, I will stay with you. Let's particularize with the situation in the North African nation of Libya. We're still trying to relate to the crisis in the Donbass, the involvement of multilateral organizations, the United Nations, and how the place of NATO and the consequences, because in March 2011, NATO actually invaded the North African state of Libya. According to them, they were going to, try to bring peace and solve the flare in the country. But then, when we look at Libya today, can we be categorical to say that NATO is imperative in a war zone? And if we're taking a case of Libya, what will be the ramification if actually NATO enters the Donbass?
Well, I think Libya just is one of the most striking examples, because it was a direct intervention that resulted into assassination, and quite an atrocious assassination of the country's leader. And the contrast that can be observed over there is very striking as well, because what you had, the so-called Jamahiriya, was a country that was doing really well, a country that had fundamental science developing, a country that had quite a lot of social welfare, and all of it was over just within a few months of the intervention. And then you could see refugees flooding all of the neighboring countries. You could see actual modern-day slave markets where, there would be a price tag put on human beings, and that would be like $200 for a person. I mean, this sounds absolutely ridiculous, maybe, but that was the happening that was being observed there. So for that reason, it was one of the striking examples, I think. But unfortunately, those events of 2018 have not triggered a wave of, let's say, a wave of any kind of protest or any kind of resistance. Yet at the same time, as the time was passing by, and I think it's a very important trend to look at right now, the Pan-African movement that is getting stronger and stronger, based on the very same ideas that Muammar Gaddafi was advocating for, that Africa has to be united, that Africa has to be, well, united meaning there had to be more cooperation in between the countries, and more of regional cooperation, and more of trade, and more of joint security efforts and whatsoever else. So the modern day Pan-Africanism, to a great extent, is based on the heritage of those times. But I think at the current moment in time, what's happening in the countries of the western side of the continent and its central part is even more interesting to look at, because those countries are standing strong, resisting a system which does not allow them to control their own economies, political systems, and I think this would be setting an example of the new level of movement for sovereignty, and it already is. Yet at the same time, the process will definitely be quite painful, and we already see examples of pressure being applied onto leaders that refuse to follow the rules and orders coming from either across the pond or across the Mediterranean. So the way the situation unfolds in the upcoming 2 or 3 years would definitely define the upcoming destiny of the continent itself. And if alternative solutions would be found in terms of building better relations with other countries of the globe, then we will see a completely different balance of power, and then we will see a situation in which the Western actors would have to be buying the goods that they need at a price that is much more fair than the current one. So trying to benefit from everybody else and set an example to them and preach in terms of their culture, political system, and basically everything. I think the times when it was possible would be over soon.
Okay, thank you for that. Coming back to you, Dana KOVALIK, earlier on you were talking about the Russian representative, permanent representative at the United Nations, telling you and applauding, of course, the fact that you and your teammates visited the Donbass. We are looking at the place of civil diplomats, which, borrowing your words. The question is the fact that, according to some pundits, the crisis in the Donbass is actually underreported, particularly by mainstream media. And now that, independent expert and also some very audacious news agencies, private news agencies are making their way to the Donbass to ascertain the real state of affairs. But the question is, when you visit the Donbass, there is actually either a communique is released tagging you as a Russian propagandist, so you cannot actually, you should be given a travel ban and other, sanctions. The question is, how is this already an impediment into, having a clear understanding of the crisis in the Donbass, particularly by the media, to be able to opt the, the media representation of the crisis?
Yeah, well, it's very troubling. As you say, when you go to the Donbass, you do get immediate reprisals, certainly from your own government. I had a global entry pass before I went to the Donbass the first time. That was revoked. I'm now pulled over and interrogated every time I come back in the United States. And as you say, you tend to be mobbed on social media by people saying that, it's illegal to go to the Donbass. A reporter yesterday at the press conference said that to us, a Ukrainian reporter. So there's a deterrent effect, obviously, and the goal is that Westerners not go to the Donbass, because if they saw the Donbass, they saw these people who have been under 10 years of war, right? Not just 2.5 years of war. People who yearn for independence, but also yearn to be back part of Russia, which is their homeland, their motherland, for some time, certainly going back to Catherine the Great. This cuts against the narrative that the West is telling us, right? That Russia's the bad guy. They're the invaders. They're the ones who want to have some sort of land grab in the Donbass against the will of the people there. No, it's quite the opposite. The people there want to be part of Russia. They see Russia as a country that defended them in their time of need. If any criticism they have of Russia, it's that Russia did not come sooner, frankly. And that's inconvenient to the Western narrative. So yeah, you don't see many Western reporters in the Donbass. You don't see many people going to the Donbass just to see for themselves what's happening. And that's why it's important for people who yearn for peace, who want to know the truth, to go to the Donbass. You'll never find a more beautiful, welcoming people, by the way. I've made many friends going there that I will have for the rest of my life. It's a very special place. It was the backbone of the Russian Revolution, of the Soviet Union, and they still carry with them a lot of that revolutionary spirit, which I certainly appreciate.
let me continue and stay with you still. Then we're still looking at how the media can play a major role in solving the crisis in the Donbass by reporting the real states. So with the Donbass open, when like you visited the Donbass and you always see a report from the mainstream media when either a group of experts visits the Donbass, at the end point it will be like it was sponsored by the Russian government, or they are working for the Russian you know, for Putin. That's why they are bringing such maybe analysis, or their facts are very positive on the side of Russia. How can we change the paradigm? How can we change the narratives to ensure, you know, peace reporting that will eventually solve the problem or the crisis in the Donbass? Because I believe the media has a major role to play as far as you know, solving the crisis in the Donbass and even elsewhere is concerned.
Yeah, I mean, the way they're going to solve it is simply by reporting on it and talking about the history of it and talking about the war starting in 2014. As for the claims that people like me are somehow Russian-sponsored, I would categorically deny that, and I discussed that yesterday at the United Nations. I pointed out, I mean, first of all, as I said, I've been to the Donbass 3 times in the last year and a half. Never once was I sponsored by the Russian government. On this most recent trip to Lugansk, I mentioned when I got to Russia, I landed at the SVO airport in Moscow. I was held in customs for 5 hours till 2 in the morning. And I'm not complaining about that, but I mean, it was hardly that the red carpet was rolled out for me by the Putin administration, right? They didn't know I was there. And then when we went to Lugansk, we took a commercial bus there, 15 hours, with other Russians, other Ukrainians. And when we got to the border there of Lugansk, we were held in customs for an hour there, and our phones were taken and they were checked. And we were processed, as anyone would be, and finally allowed in. Again, it was hardly that the red carpet was rolled out for us. We were not VIPs. We were not guests of Putin or the Russian government. In fact, our hosts this time in both Russia and Lugansk were Ukrainians. In Moscow, they were Ukrainian immigrants that are members of a group called the Union of Ukrainian Immigrants and Political Prisoners. And the folks who hosted us within Lugansk were, again, Ukrainian. One of them was with this Union of Ukrainian Immigrants and Political Prisoners who had moved not into Russia proper, but from Odessa into Lugansk, and the rest were just Ukrainians who live in Lugansk. So it's far from the truth that somehow we were there under the auspices of the Russian government, and I think people need to hear that.
And it is very imperative, of course, bringing the truth to the people to change narratives with the aim of seeing that a peace returns to these regions, especially as the susceptible population are crying every day for peace. And to you, Yulia, we're still looking at how we can really report well the situation in the Donbass in helping to solve the crisis. You know, I actually listened to the press briefing presented by Daniel and colleagues at the United Nations headquarters in New York. And one of the interrogations from one of the pressmen actually, you know, got me thinking about still the place of the media when a journalist categorically pointed to the briefing made by Daniel, Christopher, and HINKLE as, you know, a show or a joke that is meant to promote Russian ideology. And when we stated in the preamble that this mission was actually sponsored by the Russian, as Russia is leading the United Nations Security Council this month, the mission was sponsored by the permanent mission of the Russian Federation. How can we, try to comprehend some of these, and the point is bringing a solution to the media that will be more peace oriented than bring out reports that will cause more chaos, especially in the minds of the populations watching the development in the Donbass and elsewhere around the world.
Well, I think in order to provide answers to this kind of questions, it's necessary just to do some simple analysis that would be based on facts. Number one, regarding the press conference, Russia presides at the UN Security Council at the moment, which has already been causing quite a lot of claims and conflict starting from the spring when Russia's presidency was just announced over there, so you can backtrack it on the media in quite an easy way. And the event of yesterday, I would rather say organized than sponsored in terms of this. Yet at the same time, you could see that the event was open to anyone who was willing to participate, and the Ukrainian journalist that has called it a clown show or a joke or whatever it was had his opportunity to voice his opinion in an open way. I mean, he got the accreditation for the event. There was no issue of him being there and asking that question that Daniel responded to. And well, if that was a clown show and if that was all, fake and false, that would probably mean that the new regions of Russia are just, a huge Hollywood facility where you will not find anyone else but actors or anything else but decorations. That would probably imply that, because once people go there and they're free to talk, communicate, film, they're free to move around, being limited just only by security regulations, it's really hard to fake something like that. It's hard to fake artistic representations or artistic takes on what is happening there, and you can see how much, emotions people try to express through poetry, through songs, through various kinds of, things of the kind. And I do realize that all the above mentioned could also serve as a tool of propaganda or even brainwashing. But there is always just one thing that could always tell you what is true and what is fake. And that's called the moral compass and simple common sense and logic. So when you look at the actual facts, you analyze them, and you analyze the legal aspects, you analyze the actual happenings, you will see that there are a lot of internal contradictions in what is being publicly said and what is being actually done by the West and its allies and proxies. If you look at Zelensky, for instance, and if you go back to his political campaign that got him elected with almost like 70% of the votes, aside for the fact that he was a young politician, a well-recognized actor that was initially causing or initially, let's say, triggering certain kind of positive emotions among the people that wanted some fresh blood to come in, someone younger, someone less corrupt, someone, fresh, generally speaking, to the political arena. If you go back to what he was promising to his voters, and if you actually compare it to what he was doing once he got to the office, you will see that it's very much different. And I would also like to bring this point to the attention of the audience that is not aware about his political path. But he was an actor, a comedian, and there is quite a lot of his sketches and comedy shows available on the internet to go back to it and see. But then he was starring in one of the episodes that was called "Servant of the People." And later on, when he was running his campaign, it had the same name, and it's the same name that his political party still has, Servant of the People. So basically, people were associating his political campaign with the episodes. And in the episodes, you will see that he was advocating for the things that were the complete opposite of what he was doing. So when you look at simple things like those mismatches in terms of rhetorics and contradicting declarations and policies and many other things, I think there will be much more facts to support the point, or to much more facts to look at and understand where is the truth and where is the fake. The same analysis could be applied to what Russia's President Vladimir Putin was saying, and the key political declarations that he made were made, I assume, during the Munich conference, Munich Security Conference of 2008. And if this doesn't ring any bells, it's possible to go back to the archives and take a look at this one and compare it to the policies that he's been implementing for the following years of his terms. So that was essential. That is essential, I think, to analyze it. And there are certain things that you can trick, which is you can always trick your mind and the brain that tends to be playing logical games and whatsoever else. There is anything you might possibly try at least to justify, including genocide, including mass killings, including whatsoever else. And we've seen examples of such in human history. Yet at the same time, you cannot trick your conscious, if you have it. Absolutely. You cannot trick your emotional response if you're still a living human being.
Of course, very imperative. We're almost running over, but we can't go without looking at recommendations that, of course, can be proposed to those key stakeholders that make major decisions pertaining the crisis. With you, Daniel, what recommendations would you make, particularly to international community, that will de-escalate tensions and work towards a peaceful resolution of the crisis in the Donbass?
Yeah, I mean, I think there should be a high-level delegation sent by the West to Moscow to meet with Vladimir Putin. It should include the President of the United States, Prime Minister of Great Britain, Chancellor of Germany, President of France, and they should sit down and talk. I mean, that's what makes sense. During World War II, the U.S., France, Great Britain, and Russia were allies. And they should be allies now. Russia is a chosen enemy of the West. It's not a necessary enemy. It's actually a historic friend. As we're celebrating today, it's July 4th. It's Independence Day in the United States. Russia supported U.S. independence in 1776. The Russian Tsar supported Abraham Lincoln in the Union against the South. Because Russia had already itself banned serfdom in its own country. And by the way, Russia never had slavery of the type we had. It never imported slaves, to its great credit. And of course, Russia supported the Allies during World War II. We are friends. We should be friends. And when the West recognizes that fact, recognizes Russia's right to exist, and talks to Russia as an equal, that's when we can solve this problem.
Okay, thank you so much. One minute with you, Yulia. Recommendations pertaining how we can de-escalate tensions in the Donbass. 1 minute, please.
Well, de-escalation requires negotiations, and it requires recognition of all of the actors and their right to have a sovereign position. So that is key. Superiority and hegemony that has been dominating is definitely not going to lead the world anywhere. So if the existing system, which is the hegemony, is attempting to save itself in the first place, the risks that we face in this kind of a case is that they would go for anything, including triggering a nuclear conflict. So we have everything at stake. Basically, the existence of planet Earth is at stake at the moment. So unless we manage not just to sit down at the negotiation table, but to recognize the parties of the conflict as the sovereign ones, having all the necessary rights to exercise their sovereignty and decision-making processes, nothing would happen. So there is nothing new that should be invented. All of those mechanisms and all of the legal framework is already signed as a part of the UN Charter, for instance. What has to be done is that it has to be implemented the way it is, with the rules and regulations being the same for everyone, without some of the parties having the exceptional rights to dictate.
Okay, thank you so much, dear Yulia, for your insight, and Daniel KOVALIK, thank you for throwing more light on the realities in the Donbass. We continue to chart ways to see how we can mitigate the grave and negative impacts of the crisis threatening in the Donbass, the Middle East, and elsewhere across the global world. Thank you so much, televiewers, for trusting the Pan-African Television for You Media Africa. Remember, it is another view of the world, and we continue to bring you what is very positive and constructive. Thank you.